What's the difference between a showing of quilts and a quilt show? From JR's Executive Inn in Paducah, Kentucky, Quilt City, USA, it's the 13th Annual American Quilter Society Quilt Show and Contest.
Drunkard's Path, the vines,
color.
the colors, the thought. It's beautiful.
The work that went into it. A lot of work into that.
Oh, that's so pretty.
That too.
There's that too. I like the one behind it too.
The applique. Oh gosh, there's everything on that quilt.
But look at that, how she's got that put together.
The AQS Show and Contest is an event eagerly anticipated by the thousands of quilters who come to Paducah each spring. Just as the city explodes into the colorful hues of spring after the bleakness of winter, the quilts on display are resplendent reminders of the new season.
award for excellence in machine.
Awards are what make the Paducah Show more than just another showing of quilts. In past years, the awards banquet was held on Friday nights, and the winners were already known. In 1997, the banquet was held Wednesday night, the eve of the show's opening. The executive inn showroom was charged with excitement and anticipation. Who would win was the question being asked throughout the room. When the winning quilts were dramatically unveiled on stage, gasps of appreciation filled the air. Judith Thompson of Winona, New Jersey, was the most excited quilter at the awards banquet. She is the 1997 Best of Show winner and received a check for $15,000 for her winning quilt.
It's called Vintage Rose Garden, and the reason that I named it that is because I'm a collector of antique fabrics, and it's a combination of vintage fabrics and modern fabrics. It took me about a year to make this quilt, but I did other things in between. I have a Mariner's Compass quilt over at the museum right now, and I worked on that at the same time I worked on this, so the two of them together took me about a year. I thought that this bright yellow background could stand up to these nice old fabrics. If you put them on a white background, I felt they would, or a light background, I felt they would just wash away. And this way they really stand out. So every block in this quilt has some piece of old fabric in it. And many of the old fabrics that I have been reproduced. You will see them on the market in lots of different colorways, but I have a lot of the original fabrics here in this quilt.
Judith's success story is one of perseverance. She had entered the AQS show and contest before, but 1997 was the first year she had a quilt accepted into the show.
I started in '76. And my quilting didn't work out very well, so I put it away. I had a small child. I went on to other things. I tried again in '79, and that quilt was sort of poor, and I knew that I liked doing it, but I put it away. Then in '83 is when I really started. I bought a book, and I sat down, and I figured out how to do hand piecing from a book, because machine piecing wasn't working for me. So since 1983 is when I can say that I really started quilting. And I'm a hand piecer and hand applique and hand quilting.
Back in 1983, did Judith ever think she would be standing at the top of the quilting world?
Absolutely not. Had no idea. Well, I didn't even know about contests then. I had no idea that this type of thing was done. I mean, I just wanted to make quilts.
And is it strip pieced, you say?
It's strip pieced, right. You know, strips were assembled in sets and cut apart at a 45-degree angle and then put together to form the star.
The AQS show and contest allows quilters to meet with many of the winners face to face and ask questions about the quilts.
What are you doing next year?
I'm going to surpass this year. I promise you.
Is it already in the works?
Really?
What was the inspiration for this quilt?
Well, a lot of things, but many years ago I saw some architectural books, and they showed these lovely molded ceilings of some buildings in France, and I always thought how wonderful they would look, but I wanted them a little more feminine. And then when I discovered this technique with the colored yarn, I saw it, but it was all juvenile designs, little teddy bears and little things, and I thought this could be wonderful. It could be very sophisticated, very exquisite. So I worked on it, studied it. I had to buy the little dress to figure out how to do it. They wouldn't teach me, so I bought the dress, took the little collar apart, figured out how to do it, and then we went on from there. So this quilt is called My Garden of Dreams, and actually it's about illusion and reality, and it's something that I've been dreaming about for a number of years. I've designed this quilt in my mind maybe 100 times, and then finally we decided we were going to do it for real. And altogether there were 12 of us that worked on it, and it is trapunto using colored yarn. We also used embroidery. It also has even a little bit of beadwork. So it had appliqued also. This peach-colored piece in the center is appliqued. So we used almost every kind of technique that you can think of in quilting. We use a stab stitch. So it's a stitch straight up and down, one hand under the quilt, one on top. Most people, at least in the United States, do a rocking stitch. And You cannot get those tiny, fine little stitches with a rocking stitch, only with a stab stitch. But it's difficult to have the back look as lovely as the front. It takes practice. Just continue to practice. And I believe that we have mastered it. You look at the back, you'll see that it's exquisite.
And I had been collecting the fabrics for quite a long time, looking for just the right color variation that would reflect what I thought would sort of be the colors that we see in our landscape in Wisconsin and many of the seasons. And mostly we see drab, which is the background color, sort of a light khaki. But we see these bright colors too that just come out in the spring and in the fall and really set off the background colors. So that's what I wanted to get, and in a real traditional format with lots and lots of machine quilting, which I love to do. I was a hand quilter to start out with, and I had an injury to my neck, and it was really hard to hand quilt. Plus, it was so slow. I had so many quilts I wanted to make, you know, that were just crying to be made.
I'm in the same.
Yeah, so I learned the Harriet Hargrave technique, and that's where I learned. I'm self-taught from her book.
Oh, you didn't go take classes.
No.
You just stepped up. Oh, I love that.
Yeah,
I love
no,
that.
just figured it out and had the book, which was wonderful. It has all the information, and just started out with straight line quilts, made a lot of them, and then came to Paducah in 1993 with my first quilt, and it had free motion quilting. It was real pretty, but saw what you could do, and went home, and I was determined to learn more and get better.
I like movement in quilts. I obviously love bright colors, and I love orange and purple together. And the quilt that won shows 3 different depths. I got the first design from my uncle's bathroom tile floor, and I added these curves on it to make it appear that there was something on top of the block behind it. And then I used all dark framework and used medium and light for the circle, so that you would get, when you sit back and kind of blink your eyes a little bit, it looks like, I don't know what you'd call it. It just looks like it's moving, kind of. And then it's called changing focus, and if you could see the top of it, it's taller than this, and it changes from all circles down to directions going that way.
There are 7 hexagons on this quilt. The center hexagon was designed to be cool colors, and then I did 6 other hexagons around it. They're all paper pieced. The colored sections are all paper pieced. And I wanted to create warm colors. That's what the oranges and yellows and reds are. And then it goes back out to cool colors again. These gray areas were all strip pieced first, and then a template was laid over top of the stripped units and then cut out and then sewn together. All the colored areas are quilted with rayon thread. The border is also quilted with rayon thread in 24 different colors going around the edge. And hopefully I was creating a depth of illusion going from the outside to the inside. Okay, the back of the quilt I did all in black, and there are 42 different colors of threads that all come together, machine quilted in rayon thread, each hexagon. And then where the 3 hexagons meet, it comes in here. The parts that are not colored are all done with smoke invisible thread. I haven't come down yet at all. I'm just very honored, very thrilled, just so very excited. And I'm just very pleased that I was accepted into this show and that they picked my quilt over all these beautiful quilts.
First place in applique amateur went to Mary Drook of Wabash, Indiana for Wabash Rose. Mary used hand applique, hand quilting, and trapunto on this quilt. She says, doing it the right way was worth all of the effort. Redoing was discouraging, but I kept going and it was worth it. First place in applique professional went to Darlene R. Scow of Salt Lake City, Utah for Cherry Basket. Darlene says, I like the bold colors which were chosen from the fabric used in the flower vase. Applique is my favorite kind of quilting. Darlene adds that she quilts several hours almost every day. First place in traditional pieced amateur was won by Della M. Catlett of Springfield, Missouri for her quilt titled Celebration. This hand-pieced and hand-quilted quilt was inspired by the work of Ginny Beyer. Della says she is a lover of tradition and appreciates all those who have gone before her. She also admits to being a fabraholic. The winner of first place in the traditional pieced professional category was Feathered Star by Barbara Swania of Fairview, North Carolina. Quilts by Barbara have been included in AQS shows in 1990, 1994, and 1996. Barbara says, I'm finding that the more challenging the work, the better I enjoy it. Of her quilt, she says, it was difficult to piece, but satisfying to do a good job. Road to the Sun by Emmy Howard of Jacksonville, Florida, was the first place winner in the Innovative Pieced Amateur category. A 1996 honorable mention winner in this category, Emmy says her original design and the colors she used were inspired by the mountain area of North Carolina in late fall. First place in mixed techniques, professional or amateur, went to Noriko Masui of Japan for A Mandala of Flowers. A mandala is a geometric design symbolic of the universe, used in Hinduism and Buddhism as an aid to meditation. She says, being a mother of 2 daughters, I feel happiness in my daily life designing and making quilts. Standing Tall is the title of the first place winner in the group quilt, professional or amateur, made by Suzanne Warren Brown and Dorothy M. Brinkman of Arkansas City, Kansas. Suzanne and Dorothy both love flowers and are interested in combining techniques to express the real essence of a garden. This quilt is the 3rd in a series. The first place winner in the miniature, professional or amateur category was Dancing at Netherfield by Judith Day of New South Wales, Australia. A 3rd place winner in the miniature category in 1996, Judith says her quilt is based on the design of an 1830 quilt in the National Trust collection in South Australia. Judith says, I love making small quilts, particularly appliqued with lots of quilting. The Letters is the title of the quilt made by Bobby Sullivan of Scituate, Massachusetts, which won first place in the wall quilt amateur category. According to Bobby, this quilt was inspired by a box of letters that a neighbor found in his home. They were written between 1917 and 1918. It tells the story of men going off to war in glory and not coming home. She goes on to say, I am a contemporary quilt artist, and my quilts usually reflect an emotion. First place in wall quilt, professional, went to Jane Blair of Pennsylvania for 2nd time around. Jane has won a number of awards in past AQS shows, including Best Wall Quilt in 1996 and Best of Show in 1988. 2nd time around is an original design inspired by an antique coverlet. Jane says, when the machine stitches pulled out on the finished top, the entire top was made over. This quilt was 2nd time around in execution as well as design. She adds, this stitch and fabric thing is an obsession. Karen H. Sink of Colden, New York won first place in pictorial wall quilt, professional or amateur, for her quilt Last Walk Together. According to Karen, this quilt is my tribute to my late parents who taught me appreciation of the beauty of God's artwork, but who never shared with me my efforts in quilting. She says, I will never be as wonderful an artist as my mother, but I wish she could be with me. In the theme wall quilts, plaids, the first place winner was Susan Knight of Bay Village, Ohio for My Plaid Garden. Susan says, this quilt combines the 2 things I love to do, quilting and embroidery. When I show this quilt, I am surprised by how amazed people are that I could create this garden using fabric. It makes me feel good. The Wall Handworkmanship Award went to Ellen Heck of Somas, California for Nature's Splendor. The bird block center was inspired by a 17th century mosaic she saw in an art book. Of her quilt, Ellen says, "I tried to capture nature with its abundance of birds and flowers in this quilt. I'm happy to say I'm a quilter. It gives me great pleasure to meet a lot of wonderful people." The Wall Machine Workmanship Award went to Amy Chamberlain of Plano, Texas for Aunt Beryl's Garden. According to Amy, Aunt Beryl's Garden is a memorial quilt celebrating the life of a New England farm lady. Her encouragement and approval meant much to me as I was growing up. I still sense her approval of my work using the skills she made possible for me to develop. The Best Wall Quilt Award was won by Laura Murray of Minneapolis, Minnesota for Heliacal Rise. The quilt is hand and machine pieced and primarily machine quilted with a very small amount of hand quilting. Quilts by Laura have been exhibited in 5 previous AQS shows. Laura is pleased with her effort. She says, "I'm happy with this quilt. It's the first quilt I've made where I can say, I wouldn't change a thing." One of the most common questions that fill the exhibit hall is, how long did it take you to make this quilt? The answers are as varied as the quilts and quilt makers themselves.
Start to finish, it probably took a little less than 2 months.
And sometimes the answer is downright scientific.
12 people worked 7 months, 6 days a week, 8 hours a day, and we figured it up in that 16,128 hours.
The show also gives quilters the chance to visit vendors who have the latest tools, patterns, and quilting innovations for sale. Every available inch of the executive inn is given over to the show.
It is. It's just beautiful, just really beautiful, and the flowers, just gorgeous, really nice. The dragonfly, you almost have to get up and look at it close. It's gorgeous.
Beautiful.
Oh, it's beautiful.
That's my pick.
It took more patience than Job had to do that.
This is the main reason you come, is to pick up ideas and it inspires you to do better.
It's so wonderful because it brings all the women from all over the world to, we have a common denominator, and everyone's so friendly. It's just a wonderful experience.
And what does the quilt show chairman think about the quilts on display?
Well, when I went through the slides for the first time, my initial reaction was that we seem to have more traditional style quilts, and I think it runs in cycles. Part of it depends on what teachers are teaching what classes, and right now we have a lot of teachers teaching piecework. They're combining it with applique and using very traditional patterns to do that. So I think my initial reaction to this show was that we didn't have quite as many art quilts as we have in some other shows, but we certainly have beautiful quilts.
This is a quilt that I started as a block exchange for our guild. We were going to make blocks, and I made the mistake of laying them out together when I was done. And they look so nice, I had to go back to the store and get enough fabric to do it again. And then the applique work on it, the bows and the leaves are my own design, put it together. It was interesting. I did the top, and then there was about a 2-year period before I quilted it, and I was glad there was that time lapse in there because I did a better job of quilting it than I would have originally done. But I enjoyed doing it. It was something that carried me. I worked on it in several states while I was doing it. You know, I don't even like pink, and there's a great deal of pink in this quilt. I'd really like to show you the back of it. It's really a pretty fabric I found.
But you don't like pink?
No, I don't like pink, but I do like that.
This quilt was made for my son and his new bride that were married a year and a half ago. It was finished a year after they were married. My first quilt that I made was a giant dahlia, and I have it on my bed. So when my son was married, I thought I'd make he and his wife a quilt of the same design. But I've graduated from the traditional dahlia, so I incorporated some new fabrics and some new movement going on to make it different. My daughter-in-law loves navy blue. My son does not like navy blue, so I added some bright colors to liven it up, and I added applique. I'd like to show you the back of the quilt. First of all, I like to use a print fabric that ties all the colors together. And it's a very traditional design, like I said, so I used the calico on the back. I also transferred some photos from the wedding as a memento for the kids.
But I'm an appraiser, and in order to learn to be an appraiser, I had to study 200 years of textile history. And when you study historical quilts, some just sort of seem to stand out in your mind. This was actually inspired during dinner one night. I was at a lecture by a very famous quilt historian, and the dinner topic was how women learn to read and write, and I had a knife and fork in my hand, and she said it, and this popped in my head, and there it was. Well, just, like 3 years later, but it's a lot of fun to do. And it gets some very mixed reactions, all the way from belly laughs to tears. And
I designed this quilt for my daughter and her new husband. They recently moved into a new house that has a wetlands out behind. So I wanted to make a quilt for them with that theme. I designed the quilt using the trillium and the iris patterns designed by Bonnie Castor, just the flower parts, and then put it all together with some cattails and what I thought was a good wetlands looking background piece. In the background I have other cattails and weeds quilted. And then, to keep with the wetlands theme, I used a flying geese pieced border design. And as you can see, I ranged from large geese to small geese to represent them flying in and out. It's completely hand appliqued, and if I had known what I was getting into when I was started, I may not have done it, but it was really fun to do in the end.
did different fabrics and stuff.
The future of quilting is in good hands, as evidenced by Lauren Hausman, the youngest quilter to take one of the many classes and workshops offered during the show. And what is Lauren's ultimate quilt making goal?
I would like to win Best of Show.
Quilts are for beds, for walls, and for wearing. The fashion show is an event that is eagerly anticipated.
found the fabric that is in the collar and on the skirts, which is a batik from Indonesia. And I thought it was the most beautiful piece of fabric I'd ever seen with the overprinting in the metallic gold. And so I wanted to build a whole ensemble around that and found the other fabrics to coordinate with that. And then I wanted to use some new techniques. With every garment, I try to use at least 2 new techniques. And with this garment, one was to use fusible interfacing and to transfer the bird design that's in this batik onto the interfacing, then fuse it to the back side of this wool, and then stitch from the back using silky sliver gold metallic thread. And so I've repeated the bird design on the front and on the back. This is what I call Zen beading, and you stitch down 3 large motifs, and then you build out the design with a variety of beads. And so it sort of looks like a computer board. Right now I'm really in shock, and it won't really set in until I probably get home in a few days, because seeing the work that's done, the level and the accomplishment, and how beautiful the ensembles are developed as a total look, the level of craftsmanship and artistry, it just gets better and better every year. And so I'm completely in awe that my garment would be selected as the best of show. It's wonderful.
Okay, I saw a pattern I liked. It was a plaid. And I lived in Europe for 4 years, in Germany, and I collected a lot of woolens, and I knew I was going to make a coat someday. And I decided I would do it this time. I originally started to do lattice piecing, and I did some samples. And I do samples and everything. That saves me a lot of time and agony ripping out. And I ended up just laying these pieces down and stitching on them in place and just put the coat together and just kept on going. One thing always leads to another for me. And I have lots of ideas and keep dreaming.
Well, the shawl has 3,000 hand-sewed beads. Each one is sewed by hand. The embroidery is done by machine. It took about 3 months. It's a log cabin variation. The jacket is hand appliqued, and I always like to do something with the lining. This is silk, and I hand applique the leaves. Hand-dyed fabrics, and there's only about 600 beads on the jacket compared to almost 3,000 on this one.
The fabric starts flying, and so does the hilarity during the auction, an annual event that benefits the Museum of the American Quilter Society, known as MAX. The bidding is fast and furious. There are bargains galore, and fun and fellowship are the order of the night. MAX is always on the list of attendees' must-visit places while in Quilt City, USA. The museum houses quilts from the permanent collection of past AQS show and contest winners, as well as specially curated exhibits all year long. From the stunning architecture and entrance to the breathtaking quilts inside, MAX is one of the crown jewels of Paducah.
I work for a Presbyterian church, and the pastor and his wife had commissioned me to do a quilt, and they asked for mountains, trees, rivers, and perhaps a little church since they were a pastor. I started 3 other quilts before this one that I wasn't pleased with. They just didn't seem to be appropriate for their home. And then suddenly I saw this design and thought that I would just use it in colors that I thought would be appropriate. I used some of Mickey Lawler's sky dye fabrics for the sky. And then I wanted to put a new look to it by doing the quilting with a kind of a ghosty looking tree, which you see in this area. And I did that with wool yarn. And in order to accomplish that, I put the wool yarn in the bobbin and flipped the quilt over to its back and then quilt it basically from the back side, not really knowing where the tree was going to be on the front of the quilt until it was all over with. Well, I like quilting. I'm a musician by profession, so I spend a lot of time with my music, and when I'm not doing music and I'm working with quilts, I really enjoy it. Some people find it interesting, but my dad and I started quilting at the same time. My dad quilts as well, so it's not just for women anymore.
And how does it feel to have a quilt hung at the AQS show?
I can't believe it. I really can't believe it. It's something that you dream about, but you don't really I didn't think it would ever come true for me.
But this is always a thrill. You always think this is the last time, and you're so surprised
that I have done something that AQS says is okay. That I have, for that, to achieve something like that it was wonderful.
I've probably made 200 quilts, and to actually have one that gets in this show and hangs was just like a dream come true.
It's so exciting to come into the show and see your own quilt hanging there.
We hope this retrospective of the 13th Annual American Quilter Society Show and Contest has brought back some wonderful memories if you were lucky enough to have attended. If you've never been to Paducah during the show, just think of everything you missed and make plans to attend. The circus may be the greatest show on earth, but the AQS show is the greatest celebration of the art and craft of the quilt.